Hello. I've been wanting to film something like this for a while. I don't know how open I'm gonna be about things. I don't even have an exact plan of what I'm gonna talk about in this. But I will say up front that I am editing another video at this time as I'm recording this. So I do have another roleplay video lined up to release after this one. So if you don't really want to watch me ramble about my life, so if you don't really want to sit down and listen to me ramble about my life, or if you would rather just wait until I release my usual content again, feel free to skip this video. This is more of a means of therapy for me mostly, and just because I want to be I have been at least wanting to be somewhat transparent about what I've been going through in my life, especially for the past, I want to say 3 to 6, 7 years. I'm gonna do my best to make this as relaxing and ASMR themed as possible, but there might be noises captured from the neighbors. I do share a wall with another neighbor currently, so if any of that gets captured, I'll do my best to edit it out, but it might end up staying in the video. I'm not really sure where to start other than to explain why I became an ASMR artist to begin with, because it might give some context to how I feel about my channel, how I felt about ASMR in general. For those who are not aware, ASMR does mean autonomous sensory meridian response, and it is a phenomenon, some would say, and something I have personally have experienced for a number of years now, and it is a subject and a medium that I have been very passionate about. I became more aware of it in 2010, around that time, and I tried to actively search for it on YouTube and another medium. Around 2010, it was not as widespread or known as it is now. When I would watch this content over the years, I used it as a means of escape. I was looking for relief from the troubles in my life. A means of therapy to help with my sleep issues, my severe anxiety that I still struggle with to this day. I became enthralled with these beautiful voices beautiful ASMR artists. And when I say beautiful, I don't mean in terms of like their physical appearance, but it's just mainly their voices or their mannerisms, the way they would portray themselves on camera just induced this magic for me. And I became very inspired by it. At the time, however, I was much more heavy in weight than I am now. And I was especially not in a very good place in my life. And I figured that I was not good enough to pursue making my own ASMR content or to even put myself on camera in general. At the time, I was also married. I'm not married anymore, but at the time I was in a very abusive marriage. I got married very young, when I was basically 20 years old. I was not ready for it, but I was so impressionable at the time and very much more naive. I was not a good player. I was not in a good place in my life. And I did not think I was beautiful enough, pretty enough, thin enough, young enough to pursue being a YouTuber, a content creator, let alone an ASMR creator. I did not think it was a possibility for me at the time, and I didn't even know how to go about doing it. So, when I finally did get up the courage to start creating ASMR content, I did it as a means of escape. I went into this initially not just because I wanted to be one of those beautiful, enthralling women on screen that would induce ASMR for other people, but more so, I wanted to escape. In fact, when I did start in 2017, I was already divorced, but I was not in a good place financially at the time. So there had been instances where I would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between one bad living situation to another bad living situation, going back to live in the same house as my ex even, because I could not afford at the time to live by myself. I did not have the means at the time to really take care of myself. It all started, honestly, back when I was little. And it does bring me a sense of shame to admit that, Up until only about nearly 2 years ago, I was struggling to get back on my feet because I had been in at least a few different not so great relationships. Some of them have been abusive, some of them were just not healthy. I didn't really know myself. I was still trying to find myself. And to go further back, we have to go back to when I was a child. I grew up in a very strict household, very sheltered. I'm the eldest and the only daughter in my family. I grew up with 2 brothers. They're younger than me. My father, it's kind of hard to talk vaguely about my family. My father was into sales, mostly, as a line of work. Not to go too detailed into it, but he was a bit of a salesman. When I would grow up, I noticed how he would put on this different mask in front of other people outside of our home. Whether it was strangers or friends of his, he had this very charming persona that he would display for other people. However, at home, it was a different story. There's been a lot of psychological abuse from him. Some physical abuse growing up. Emotional abuse. He had put importance on the male members of our family, my brothers. He put more importance upon them. And as for my mother and I, he treated us like we were more inferior. He raised me to be more submissive, to be quiet, to not really question anything. He didn't really teach me about boundaries or how to empower myself. So I basically grew up having experienced various forms of abuse, of trauma from him. And the way I was raised, this later changed me. I had also been exposed to sexual trauma when I was about 9-10 years old, from a babysitter. I have since reported it to the police, but for a lot of years, I did not tell anybody about it. I did not tell any adults whatsoever about it until I was about 16, I want to say. And that was when I was talking to a therapist at the time. Since I was about 10, honestly, since this had happened, since the upbringing for my family, which was very strict, very controlling, not to mention there's been a lot of religious drama where my parents enforced their religious views upon myself and my brothers without really caring about our views on it or our opinions. So there were times where I had been forced to go to youth group, to Sunday school, to church, basically against my will. And when you're really young, of course, I know parents who do follow that type of faith, and I know people who do practice these types of religions. I'm sure, I know it's important to want to share that with your children, but for me, I never really wanted it, and I never really got much out of it except just feeling afraid and like I was being controlled. The older I had gotten, the more I resented people who would force me to go to church or to just listen to gospel or about God, everything else. And I'm sorry if this is offensive for some people to hear. I don't personally believe in Christianity. I think there are good things that can come from it. I appreciate when people practice it as a means of sharing love and kindness and generosity, but when it's used as a tool to control others, to instill fear within other people, that's where I draw the line. And when, of course, there is judgment, I also cannot stand that. But I digress. So, basically, to sum it up, I was raised in a very conservative, very religious, hateful household. My parents have also been racist. I grew up around hate, racism, fear, control. I was forced to be submissive. There were even times, even as I got older, when I was an adult, and I was going through separating from my then husband. And when I was trying to get myself back on my feet, which took so long, but there were times I had to go stay with my family a few times because I had nowhere else to go. I needed help. I was in and out of psychiatric care. I can't count how many times since I was basically a child that I had to go spend time in a psychiatric hospital. Short term, but it's been an off and on process for a while, suffice to say. Every time, though, I needed help, my parents would not help me the way that I needed. For a very long time, I was not working. I was unemployed and just surviving on disability income. And they've always expressed shame upon me for having gotten married very young, for not really being a worshiper of God, for not really following in their exact footsteps. I was one of the black sheep of the family. There would be times when I would go stay with him again for short term, even as an adult. There were times where even my father would shame me about the way I was holding my eating utensils when I was a lot heavier. I could be eating my meal just fine and polite enough, but he would basically fat shame me and my mother and force us to hold our eating utensils more correctly in his eyes, or basically to tell us to eat slower. Because of my severe anxiety, I do have an anxiety disorder, by the way, but because of the anxiety I've experienced since I was a child, and how severe it could get, I have developed a habit of eating fast. I had developed a habit of eating fast just so I could get away. But basically because of my anxiety that I've experienced from my family and other sources of trauma, I had learned to eat fast. So he also told us to eat slower, hold our utensils in a certain way, be more proper in his eyes. I was subjected to further emotional abuse when he would bring up things and say the most insensitive, demeaning things to me. And I feel like I'm already losing my track of thought from thinking about all this. But suffice to say, I did not have the best upbringing. And it had led me to run away various times. When I was 20, I thought marriage would solve everything and would get me away from my family, but it made things worse. I became more of a recluse. I had struggled with reclusive tendencies since about the age of 10, but after I had gotten married at 20, they became much more severe. And it got to the point where I would hide in a room and I didn't even want to interact with my then husband or with anybody else. I would not go out many days at a time. The only times I would ever leave the house would be to go shopping for food or to go to a doctor's appointment. And yes, thankfully, eventually I got out. It took a very long time. And even after the divorce, I was still falling into this pattern of running away and going to my family for help. When that did not work and I was subjected to even more trauma from them, running to other bad living situations. I was in a group home for a time just because of how bad my depression and my mental disability had gotten. I went then from there to trying to rent my own room in someone's house. There were these little baby steps I had to take in order to develop independence, to break myself away from the cycles of trauma and abuse that I had been exposed to various times. So I went from renting a room, finally getting an apartment. Although, and this was all before I started YouTube, by the way, I was only able to keep this apartment for maybe 2-3 years. It was a limited income-based housing apartment, so when they finally raised my rent too high where my disability funds could no longer afford it, even with help, I again had to move back in with my family and again started the cycle again of just being mistreated, being abused emotionally, psychologically. Did I say emotionally? Just again and again. Around 2016, I had lost my apartment then, and I had to once again go back and live with my family because it was either I become homeless or I live with them yet again. And it was 2016 was a very hard time. A lot of political changes were going on in my country. To not go into it, it really affected my parents to the point where they were brainwashed. They probably are still brainwashed, but I digress. We did not share the same views. Obviously, we had our differences. I was still not working at the time. I was still on disability income. And my father, of course, did not really take my mental health into account, or the fact that I had just yet again gotten out of psychiatric treatment in a hospital again at the time, where I did almost a month of therapy on my agoraphobic tendencies, on my reclusiveness, on my depression, my anxiety. He did not really take those things into account for me. And eventually it got to the point where, even though I was paying them rent, and I was paying them almost all of my disability check every month, even though I was doing those things, my father tried to find every single excuse he could to try to kick me out. I remember one of the things he forced me to do was to get my cat declawed so that she wouldn't scratch on their precious furniture. And I feel bad to this day that I had to do that. He gave me all these ultimatums until it got to the point where he pulled me aside alone. And on one occasion, when I was having car issues, and I was literally trying to duct tape a broken window of my car together, one of the most hurtful things he would say to me at the time was looking at me dead in the eyes and referring to how I had been not working and on disability income and struggling with all these issues with my mental health. He looked at me flat in the face and he said to me, "I will never feel sorry for you." Those words haunt me to this day. He gave me the ultimatum at the time, saying that if I did not go get a job despite my paying him rent with my disability income that I did have at the time, that I had to leave. At the time, I chose to leave. I got my cat, I got my car, I packed my car with as much stuff as I could, and I left quietly. And I had to go back to my ex-husband's house because, again, I had nowhere else to go other than being homeless and living in a car. "2017 rolls around. This was the year I decided to make my YouTube channel. I watched ASMR on YouTube at the time, and it was evolving. At this point, it had gotten very popular. And I remembered seeing a much older woman who is very heavy set making ASMR, and she had at least 10,000 subscribers. And I just thought, well, if she can do it, so can I. So I started my channel. I just had a crappy webcam at the time, a much more crappy mic. I was a lot heavier than I am now. And I digress, my weight does fluctuate a bit still, but I've taken steps to improve upon it since. But it's just been this whole journey of trying to discover myself as well through this. I will confess, one of the big reasons I had started making ASMR content back then was wanting more financial stability. I went in it with the mindset that I was going to rescue myself and get myself out of this cycle of abuse from my family, my ex-husband, various unhealthy living situations. I wanted to break the cycle of abuse that I was in. I wanted to break the cycle of abuse that I had been in. I went into creating content with a very naive mindset that it couldn't be that hard to become an ASMR artist and to make quality content. Maybe I'll get big enough to make my own income to be able to support myself. To be able to afford my own place, so that I didn't have to go to anybody for help again, like I had been. I was wrong. YouTube did not help me achieve those things. I went into this channel with a very naive mindset. I went into it hoping to make money from it. It has not worked. It has not panned out well. When I got more involved, when I was networking with more people, things went from bad to worse. And I found myself being preyed upon by men, certain men, people. I can't just generalize and say it's men, but it's been mostly men who would try to take advantage of me and have me create content that would make me more objectified as a woman, to give them more gratification in a sexual manner, and it is something that has bothered me for so long. And it's something that I'm trying to separate myself from to this day. When I create my ASMR content now, there are certain things I'm comfortable with. I I do like to express sensuality to an extent, but I will confess that I don't like it to go very far to the point where I am objectified. It has made me uncomfortable. I have worked with people who have used me. I have trusted other artists in the community who ended up either stealing from me from one form or another, whether it was an idea, which doesn't really matter anymore, but I digress. I've had a creator promise to do a collab with me, but they ended up not going through on their end and essentially stealing with me in a material sense. I had another artist who would literally tell me that if I did not upload a video every week, I could not call myself a true artist of ASMR. This same person would make requests of me to make certain content. It also led me to have phone conversations with them where I was being emotionally manipulated and then some. I made friends who I thought were my friends. I guess they were never my friends. That just ended up using me just because they needed someone to work with, or they wanted to appear like they wanted to help newer artists. Whatever reason you want to give it. In 2019, things took a very bad turn. And I'm not going to go fully into it, but I was being manipulated by yet another artist on a more romantic scale. That hurt me so much. And I should never have put myself in that situation. And I had also ended up hurting others with that. And I do feel regret for that. It was after all that I tried to start breaking away from the ASMR community very slowly. I wanted to try to date in person because up until that point I was in a lot of long-distance relationships, a lot of internet relationships because of my tending to have been a recluse. And yes, I was divorced well by then at the time, but I ended up meeting this one man in 2019 in person when I was trying to put myself back to work. When I was dipping my toes into a job. Going back to work in one form or another. And not just living off a disability. This man portrayed himself to be charming, eccentric, was almost, well, not really perfect, but I digress. They had treated me so well initially, but he was portraying himself to be charming, and I ignored so many red flags with it. He was love bombing me and rushing things to the point where I was talked into getting an apartment with him just 3 months into that relationship. After we moved in, he changed and his true side came out. He was a very narcissistic individual, and I found myself yet again being subjected to abuse. Not just emotional, not just psychological, but it was turning physical. In 2020, while I was going through this domestic violent relationship, the abuse, the gaslighting, the mistreatment got to the point where I almost took my own life. I realize now that it was more so as a means of me trying to escape from the situation I was in at the time. Shortly after that, in August, one of my brothers died. His name was Brad. And he did take his own life. This was in the heat of COVID, 2020. He left behind a 3-page letter, and one of the final wishes he had put in it was to be cremated. I have some of his ashes in here. The whole funeral arrangement is another story. I don't even know what words to use. Everything revolving around his death made everything worse. The abuse from my then boyfriend at that time became worse. There was so much lying, there was so much gaslighting, there was so much psychological warfare coming from this individual that it absolutely broke me. It broke me mentally to the point where I felt like I had to defend myself. Police were involved. A protection order had to be issued for a year. I moved away, And I, after all that, again went back to my ex-husband's house because, again, I had nowhere else to go. My eyes have since been opened. I continued to work. I've went from one job to another. I saved up enough money and I finally got myself my own place a year and 8 months ago. And that's where I am now. I'm still working. I have since become a certified pharmacy technician. I went through other things. I had surgery a year ago where I was diagnosed with endometriosis. They found stage 2 growths. During the operation. And my chronic pain issues, that's a whole other can of worms, but it is something I'm still living with. And I guess I can call myself a survivor of endometriosis, but there is a risk it could potentially come back. Hopefully not, but it is something that I had to find out the hard way. That runs in my family, that I inherited from my mother. So where does that leave me with YouTube? I am passionate about ASMR, but with everything that happened, I had to take steps to separate myself from all of the people from the community that was hurting me. I had to humble myself because YouTube was kind of getting to my head for a while. I had to reevaluate the kind of content I wanted to create. I'm still reevaluating things. I've removed some of my videos that I was not proud of making, that either bring me pain to watch, or they embarrass me, or they just have a bad memory attached to them. I enjoy making roleplay content. I enjoy making spooky content. I enjoy cosplay. I would love to do more cosplay, but I'm not at the numbers at the moment to be able to successfully do this and make profit from it. I had to turn to working in order to get myself in a more stable place. And that's where I'm still at. I'm still working on myself. I'm still healing. I'm still learning more about myself. I'm taking steps to practice setting boundaries with people, to break away and keep myself away from the cycle of abuse and trauma that I had been in. I have a smaller group of friends now. I'm very careful of who I trust. I will even say I have trust issues. I am getting to the point where I feel like I have to stop talking, and I don't know what else to say for now. I think I have rambled on too long. And my neighbors are getting noisy. And I hope it explains at least a little bit about why it's been hard for me to really sit down and consistently make YouTube content, and I'm sorry. And I hope you can forgive me. I say that, and then I have friends of mine who tell me that I should not care, that I should make content when I want to, that I should make the content that I want, that hey, I don't have to show my face on camera. But there's a part of me that doesn't want to give up on this either, and I want to be able to make content on my own terms. So, I want to thank you for listening to me. I want to thank you, especially if you have continued to support me even when I've been on hiatus. Even when I wasn't really uploading for months at a time. I just want to thank you. I want to thank you if you ever have helped me in any way. I have shut down my Patreon, but I am thinking when I upload this video I might start a basic membership program on YouTube. So if you would like to, if you can feel compelled, or if you would like to assist me financially in any way, because as it stands, I'm not even in the YouTube partner program right this moment as this video is going up, because I have since fallen below the threshold of being eligible for monetization. But if you would like to still help me regardless, I will make a basic $1 YouTube membership program, and we could go from there. I need to wrap up this video now. The neighbors are getting too noisy. I don't know what else to say, but I will try to upload when I can. And thank you for being patient with me and still supporting me. And I want to wish you a good night and sweet dreams. Thank you again for sticking things out with me and listening to this ramble.